Welcome into the Autzen Audibles Podcast. Erik Skopil on the show. I'm Matt Prehm. Welcome to another edition. It's Portal Talk. It's recruiting talk. One we didn't think we were going to discuss. We're going to talk about Oregon losing five-star receiver Dallas Wilson, or tentatively losing. We shouldn't say it's done yet. We'll get to that. We'll also touch on some portal talk because there's been more movement with that, and it's good movement. Let's start there first. A flurry of commitments. 3 of them come in a span of 15 hours. 2 of them come in a span of 15, 20 minutes on Wednesday. The first being Alex Harkey, a 4-star offensive tackle from Texas State. The second being Jamari Johnson, a tight end from Louisville, who's also rated as a 4-star. And then lastly, the number 1 ranked player in the portal at tackle, Isaiah World, a 4-star tackle. Let's start there with Isaiah World. Great name, awesome name. 6'8", 309 pounds. Played his prep football at Lincoln High School in San Diego. Is a former teammate of current Duck Jalil Florence. Would be like a legacy fellow alumni of incoming quarterback Achilles Smith. They did not play together, but I'm sure they know each other. And this is a guy that at Nevada, he played a little bit as a true freshman or as a redshirt freshman. And then as a sophomore and as a junior has been an all-conference honorable mention player at tackle for the Wolfpack, a team, like we've said before, with Dylan Thineman, with Theron Johnson, that they weren't successful because he wasn't good enough. He was really good. It's just he was surrounded by a bunch of bad players. And you only can do so much in a team sport individually. This isn't like basketball where you can have one guy carry you, to the promised land. Isaiah World's a really talented player. It's a big addition to Oregon. I'm curious how he fits left side, right side. Erik, you probably have more on that, where you feel like he fits. But nonetheless, this is a huge solution, or potential solution, we should say, to Oregon probably losing both its tackles to the NFL.
Well, yeah, let's start with where he's played, which is most recently left tackle. And I guess I'm curious, Matt, like it made sense to get Harkey, who's played right tackle exclusively at Texas State this year. That's your Johnny Cornelius replacement. We'll get to more of him in a moment. I guess with World, who has played left tackle the last 2 years, was right tackle the year before that. Seems like that, and again, based upon his physical profile and his PFF grades and his strengths and weaknesses, this feels like a left tackle all the way. And it doesn't feel like you take the number 1 offensive tackle in the cycle if you think Josh Connolly is coming back, right?
Yes. Yeah. I had a buddy tweet me, Josh Connolly, you are now a first-round draft pick. Like,
well, I mean, it's certainly, and we're not reporting he's gone. We're just using, I guess, logic to suggest if you take both these guys, you're kind of saying probably not having Connolly back, or you're saying we're just going to have 3 awesome tackles. Connolly's going to be our starting left tackle, and these 2 guys are battling it right. Maybe that's what happens, but regardless, this is a guy who's played left tackle, played at a really high level. I was just posting my breakdown of him. Awesome pass block grades. I mean, he's 6'8", 310. You mentioned all name team, also like all physical tools team.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the prototype. I mean, Josh, for as athletic as he is listed at 6'4".
He's not 305.
He's not. And that's the issue. And that was why with Josh, I mean, not to go too far down that tangent of what is his draft stock. Like, this is a bit of an undersized, especially left tackle. Where does he end up playing? Our team's comfortable with playing a guy who's, 6'4" with, I think, longer limbs maybe than his height. But like, I guess I'd be curious to see what his draft stock looks like going forward. But clearly it seems like it's good enough that the indications here are that he'll be gone. And World is, again, really big time offensive lineman from a pass protection perspective. I think I wrote 459 pass block snaps, 0 sacks allowed, 13 total pressures. Pretty damn good. That was a top 25 pass block efficiency rate on Pro Football Focus, which again, that's where we're going to get a lot of our data for offensive linemen. There's no counting stats here. But you look at that, you go, this guy's really good in pass protection. That makes sense for a left tackle. It's not great in terms of run blocking, something to work on, but that's also maybe a case of where, hey, Harkey, who we'll get to in a moment, a little more balanced, a little better run blocker. Makes sense to have those guys at left and right tackle. And so I think that's the way you're operating, Matt. And like, let's be honest, we didn't know going into Wednesday really what this offensive line starting five, at least, like would look like in 2025. I think we now, a day later, have a pretty good feel for what they're going to do with these two players that just landed in the portal as their starting tackles, and then with presumably Iuli, Poncho, and Bedford in some combination of sides with the guards being your starting five. So shoot, I mean, I thought this was going to be something we didn't have a lot of clarity on for a moment, and it took one day and suddenly we do.
And this goes with maybe overarching thoughts on Harkey's edition as well as World's edition is we've felt like this for a while, you and I. I'm pretty confident saying you're going to agree with this. We've been pretty high on Erik Terry as an offensive line coach. There were questions when he arrived of, wow, this is a really young coach, very small track record, resume, has been at the NFL level coaching defensive linemen, and now he's coming over to coaching offensive line. He did work as a GA at Oregon under Mario Cristobal and Alex Mirabal, but there were questions. And I think you go through his first 2 seasons now at Oregon, and you look at the development of Johnny Cornelius has had coming over from Rhode Island, a guy that he was highly sought after in the portal. But I don't know if anyone kind of anticipated him being a early round draft pick. He's probably not a first rounder, but it would not surprise me in the slightest when you look at the mocks and you see him probably being a second, third, maybe an early 4th round pick. You look at the development that we've seen in a guy like Poncho, who has hit the ground running as a true freshman. He played a huge part in that recruitment. You look at the development of a Nishad Strother this season, a guy that was added last year, and you were kind of just like, ECU, is that really going to fit? And you look at how good he is this season now that he's healthy, missed most of last year with an injury. You go back and even like in 1 year of JPJ, he got 1 year of starting under at Oregon, and he was a talented player. We knew he was good, but I don't know how many people had JPJ as one of the first draft, centers drafted in a draft going into his junior year. I mean, that was
or winning the Remington.
Yes, like that wasn't on the table of discussion. And so I look at the numbers and Harkey and World and think, yeah, that they have areas that they need to improve. But I think Erik Terry's track record, and we should note, Kavanaugh behind him as one of the non-11 assistant coaches that works at that group, and they've got a couple other guys there too. They call it the law firm. Ryan Walk is another one. Dallas Warmack is in there too. This group is really good at getting guys into the system and making them better. And I think the thing with World and with Harkey here, we'll get to a second, is they've got the physical attributes, and now it's give them the skills. And giving them the skills is the easy part. It's the physical attributes that you can't do. And these guys check both those boxes. And so this is one where they're highly thought of in the portal. And I know that they're making a big jump from a talent perspective, but Oregon has shown under Erik Terry's leadership that dudes come to Oregon, they get better, and they get an opportunity to go to the NFL.
And 2 straight years Joe Moore Award finalists, which even under Mario Cristobal, they never were finalists as far as I recall. And so, yeah, that kind of illustrates what you're getting at, Matt, which is this has been, I think there was skepticism, as you said, when you bring in a 20-something to be your offensive line coach. And I don't think there should be much skepticism. And like, frankly, we know from hearing behind the scenes, like other schools were looking to hire him away. Schools from closer to his, where he grew up back in, the Southeast were interested, and he's still here. And, I think that's a big victory, and especially with what he's been able to build. And one other thing I wanted to touch on, and maybe this is kind of a way to transition a little bit into Harkey, which is you mentioned it with the Johnny. That was a guy who came from FCS and has become an all-conference player playing in one of the 2 best conferences in the country. Similar, not quite FCS, but you're talking about smaller FBS programs here with Harkey coming from Texas State, with World coming from Nevada. I know there's a sense sometimes to go, how's this transition going to work for moving guys up? I think Oregon's track record with Cornelius stands out. I know it's not the same group of coaches, but like the track record's pretty damn good with Tez Johnson, who was also in the Sun Belt, the same conference Harkey is coming from. So I just wanted to point that out for listeners who are going like, oh, we got these 2 offensive tackles, but they're from Nevada and Texas State. Like, no, like Oregon has had a track record of these guys bringing them up, developing them, and getting a lot of production out of them. And you look across the country, and there's a ton of programs out here who have, I mean, Indiana being one where basically that whole team came from like James Madison, or, I think the quarterback was from Ohio University. But like sometimes you bring up these guys up a level and they're ready to go and play. And I think the 2 guys they've secured here that we're talking about right now certainly fit into that group of kind of caliber of player, caliber of athlete. You mentioned the measurables, 6'8", 310 or so for World. Harkey was listed at 6'6", 335 at Texas State. Like that fits physically. These are bigger guys than what they've had the last 2 years at tackle. Now it's a matter of, do they have the same movement skills, the same, caliber of blocking, how what's their, I guess, where are they at technically, these kind of questions you have. But just from just kind of the blueprint of what you're looking for, these 2 guys make a lot of sense. Matt, did you have anything else you want to say on Harkey before we dive into this?
On World or Harkey?
Either one. Yeah. Did you have any remaining thoughts?
I think just on World, it was a case of, hey, you beat out Ohio State, you beat out Nebraska, Kentucky wanted him. He took an official visit to Texas A&M as well. So like this was, you look at the schools that were after him, and this was, by clear definition of his ranking, but also by the just follow the teams that are recruiting him, a big name in the portal, and that's a big win. Harkey, Oregon identified really early. He had offers from like Illinois, Cincinnati, Cal. I'm thinking of one more that I'm missing, but then he went dark and like stopped listing offers, stopped talking to people, showed up to Oregon for a midweek visit, and committed on the spot. And we should note, Harkey was the first public offer we know for Oregon in the portal. Like they clearly identified him really early, went out and got him right away. And so I think both these guys, you had 2 top 10 players at the position, 2 top 60 overall transfer portal guys. This is a huge win. And to your point of earlier, like we didn't know what the future would look like offensively up front. Now we kind of do. And it's going to be interesting to see it play out. But I will argue, like there are still some like how do things fit here? Because Poncho is back. Dave Iuli, you would assume, is going to be back and will probably assume one of the starting jobs. There's also Bedford out there. Matthew Bedford, remember, right. He was viewed as a big transfer. Where does he fit into the mix? Janoris Wilson is a guy that Oregon's really high on. Where does he kind of fit into the mix? Charlie Pickard played early in the year. He will have a year of eligibility if he wants to come back. Kawika Rogers is also a guy that has played in basically every game for Oregon this season in limited roles, but he is also an experienced guy. So I think the tackles now are solidified, and now it's kind of who lines up on either side of Poncho. And I think we know kind of who that's going to be, but there's still nonetheless some battles to see that could play out.
Yeah, there are. And we shouldn't write this off so early because, again, like Connerly might be on this roster, and now we're talking of in a totally different conversation with the tackles. And you're right. And the other thing with Bedford is this is his second, significant knee surgery in, I think, 2 years or 3 years. And what does he look like physically? We unfortunately saw with Junior Angilau a couple of years ago. That was you mentioned Nishad Strother, but when they brought in Angilau, he was the more surefire plug and play guy. And unfortunately, I think his body just really never got to the point where he could play at the level he did at Texas. So we have to wonder about that with Bedford. I think that's worth wondering. I do think if like everybody is physically healthy, I like the 5 that I mentioned before with the 2 transfers with Poncho and with Iuli and with Bedford. I think Rogers would probably be the one just to put in there because he seemingly was kind of on even footing with Iuli when Harper went down because they kind of played those 2. They played those 2 in a rotation. So clearly the staff is comfortable with him. He's also, we should note, primarily been a right tackle in practice, and that's where he played this previous season. So he has guard to tackle versatility. But yeah, that seems to me like that's kind of the cast of characters. I think I would identify those 6 as the most likely to start, and I still feel pretty good about the 5 I mentioned earlier being ultimately the group. But there's a ton of time, and that makes it kind of a challenge sometimes to project this stuff. And one thing we should note before we even dive more into Harkey is both these guys are 1-year stopgaps. And that has been the trend, with the exception of the player we're going to talk about later, Jamari Johnson, the tight end from Louisville, where, and I guess Dylan Thieneman, technically he has more time if he wants. We just have kind of, in my head, I've written him off as being, he's probably a one and done
guy.
But Darren Johnson and both these offensive tackles, they have 1 year of eligibility. They're 1-year stopgap players. And I think that is notable in terms of Alik Terry not clogging up that position going forward and saying, hey, maybe Trent Ferguson, Fox Crater, some of these true freshmen, but these offensive tackles, Rogers, Janoris Wilson that we've been developing, Lipe Moala maybe, hey, these guys, maybe they're not ready right now, but by 2026, these jobs are going to open right back up again because these guys that we brought into play are 1-year guys. Harkey's an interesting one in terms of his story to get here. He's been at 3 different schools. Yep. He was at Katy College or Tyler College, I think, in California or Texas, junior college for a year, signed to Colorado. He was part of that mass exodus when Dion got there, when he arrived, goes to Texas State. Didn't play much his first year at Texas State.
That's the real surprising one. He didn't play at all. Really.
He didn't. He had not played significant snaps of college football, at least in the FBS level, until this last year, where he was an all Sun Belt selection, graded as like the 24th best PFF offensive tackle in the country this year. Again, a little more balanced because when we were talking about World, I brought up the fact that his pass blocking grades were all World, but his run blocking grades weren't. This is a case where both of Harkey's are very comparable. I think he was like 77 as a run blocker, 77 as a pass blocker, 79 as a run blocker on PFF. And for those who don't have the context, once you get over 75, these are very flattering grades. Like the best offensive linemen in the country rarely have more than like an 85 to 90 grade total. So somebody who's in the mid 70s, and Harkey overall was an 81.5 as an offensive lineman per PFF. So he is actually the more highly graded player for PFF overall. He was an 81.5 and World is a 69.7. So, I think these are 2 really nice additions, 2 guys that were all conference at their level and that are coming up here. And frankly, 2 guys that give you kind of a nice 1-year fillers to develop some of those younger players to hopefully take over and be longer term starters in 26.
I had 2 quick notes about Harkey. One, you look at his individual game scores, grades by PFF, and his best ones came against the best competition. The first one that stands out is he more than held his own against Arizona State. And while at the time of that game, I think it was like a week 2 Friday night in Texas, it looked like, that was going to be an upset. ASU, who knows how good they are. Well, ASU turned out to be a playoff team. So, he more than held his own against a team that's now made the field in the college football playoffs. And then I think his best game overall came against Sam Houston State, out of conference, I believe. I can't remember what conference Sam Houston State is.
I think they're both in the Sun Belt. I can check.
Okay. But the reason why I bring up Sam Houston State is they're a bowl eligible team. They went 9-3 this season. They were good enough to the point where their head coach got a job offer somewhere else, and ironically enough, Oregon's running back coach was a player there for that job. So they played 2 pretty respectable or straight up good in terms of ASU opponents, and both games he more than held his own, played really well in those ones. And I guess the second just note here, and it's really new information. We don't really truly know yet the ramifications of it, but you mentioned it. Harkey spent a year at JUCO, and with Diego Pavia's court ruling of getting eligibility back after spending time at the JUCO level, he's arguing that the eligibility clock should not start if you're playing JUCO athletics. The courts gave him the injunction, and he won the lawsuit temporarily, at least for now. If that holds, Harkey could go back and file something similar or join a class action and get that year of eligibility back. So now it turns into a 2-year player instead of a 1-year player. So, that obviously wasn't on the table when Oregon looked at him. I don't think it was, but just another layer of this could be a guy that maybe in 6 months we learn he has 2 years instead of 1.
That wasn't even on my radar until you said that, Matt. It should have been, because I know we've been talking about this case, but it just hadn't clicked for me. Oh yeah, he was a JUCO guy, and I guess what are the ramifications? We're gonna have to comb through this roster and look at all the other guys.
The first one's George Silva. I mean, that's the most like realistic one for this topic too. He didn't play a ton though at Oregon, but I guess like if we want to go down a tangent, which we can, but the two big ones are Jamari Caldwell and Kobe Savage, two guys who spent JUCO years and are huge pieces to one of the best defenses in the country as starters. So could make things interesting.
Sam Houston State not in the same conference, not a Sun Belt team, a Conference USA team.
Okay.
Those small Texas schools should be in the same conference theoretically, but
I did an NCAA football season with Sam Houston State. Don't ask me why, and I couldn't remember what conference they were, but I made them good. So. Well,
that was you're following Dan Lanning's coaching career. He was a outside linebacker. That was like his first position coach job, I think, was at Sam Houston State. I don't have a whole lot more on these two guys. It hadn't clicked for me. I mentioned a moment ago that'll be something to monitor is the impact of this Pavia case and what this does for junior college players. Because we'll see how good Harkey is, but you might get to a spot where you go, actually, he has 2 years, and that feels like a huge win for Oregon to sustain a right tackle for a couple of years.
Jamari Johnson, tight end, massive dude, 6'5", 265 pounder. Will have 3 years of eligibility at Oregon. No red shirt available. He did use that already at Louisville. Greg Biggins was the first one from 24/7 Sports to throw in a crystal ball last week for Oregon to land him, and he kind of was. This definitely felt like once he hit the portal and Oregon reached out, it was go dark, take your visit, don't consider other schools, and then just pop instantly. He was here when he made his commitment. He was a 4-star athlete. Oregon offered him coming out of high school, was like a top, I think, 250 player in the country. Probably just I don't know much about Louisville football right now. It's just so far out of mind, but probably the case is, hey, he's just adjusting to the rigors of college football. He played in a majority of the games this season as one of their backups. But he's going to come to Oregon with an opportunity for playing time because, quite honestly, there's no one on roster that fits his physical, his physical nature of the sport and his measurables. There's no one that comes close. So that automatically is going to probably put him in a position to earn some playing time.
This is a guy Oregon actually recruited pretty heavily, I think, a couple of years ago. There was I can't remember how many it was, but there were
like 15 Cali guys.
I was going to say it was like close to a dozen, maybe more that went from Cali to Louisville that class, and he was one of those guys. I think probably you mentioned kind of the rigors of it. I wonder if part of it is wanting to come back home or come back closer to home, and playing at Oregon is probably an attractive opportunity for somebody who's from SoCal. And you're also right. Like this was the exact type of guy I know Jared had mentioned kind of before on the podcast of like what Oregon needs is like Kenyon Sadiq is this awesome hybrid athlete who we know we saw in the Big Ten championship. Everybody knows what he can do athletically, really improved as a blocker this year, but you can't really expect him to do it all alone because you look at the other guys that return and you're looking at Roger Saliapaga, who, Matt, I'll be honest, I don't know what the long-term looks like, or short-term, I should say, looks like for him. He's coming off a pretty significant knee injury. He's been announced out for the season. We've seen him around. It doesn't look like he's able to move all that well right now. I think this happened probably in the last month or so. So that was a guy I thought you would maybe be relying on to be a rotational piece. I don't know exactly what the time frame is. That's something we'll have to ask about when we get probably after the season. But what that looks like, so that there's a name that you kind of are uncertain of. Then you had like AJ Pugliano, who was also dealing with injury this year. I don't know if you feel great about inserting him into the lineup. And then you have Vander Plug, a true freshman. And that was the guys other than Kenyon Sadiq you had at tight end. So finding a player, frankly, of Jamari Johnson's, capability, who's a big time, prospect coming out of high school, who is physically much more, he basically is identical in size to Pat Herbert and Terrence Ferguson. Like it's a big win. And then you go watch him and you go, he's more explosive, certainly, than Patrick Herbert. He is a really good athlete. And I think even though he had, less than 200 yards receiving this last year at Louisville, I wouldn't be surprised if this is somebody who can give you a little bit more than that if you go out and watch some of the catches and plays he was able to make. So I think this was a position of need where you filled in a really logical piece who fits who really fits what you're looking for. And also, like you said, Matt, this is a multi-year guy who could be paired with Sadiq for multiple years, or who even maybe Sadiq leaves after 3 seasons. This could be a guy who is the starting guy in 2026 and beyond. So I think this is a big win. And I know it's not a plug and play starter, but it basically is with as much 12 personnel as Oregon likes to play, which is 2 tight ends on the field. And it really does feel like you now know it's Sadiq, it's Jamari Johnson as your 2 primary guys. And then you go, hopefully Rogers available. Maybe you get something out of Pugliano. Zach Grace was their fullback when they were in their Big 14 package. He's still around. You've got some other names there, and I think you feel a little bit more comfortable with this room. I don't think, Matt, this is a place where you add a second portal tight end, but if they did, I think that would indicate maybe what's going on with Roger and how they feel about the rest of the room aside from the 2 guys that we just mentioned.
Well, I was just going to say, I kind of already think this is an indicator to at least AJ Pugliano. I don't want to single guys too much out, but he was hurt a lot in high school. I think he was hurt this season as well. He didn't play in any games this season. I think this is a clear indicator of, hey, we need to add some experience. And the fact that they took a guy that's got 3 years of eligibility kind of tells you they over-recruited. I don't think they over-recruited Roger. But it could probably be argued at least of, hey, Roger, like you played in 11 games and a lot of it was on special teams, and maybe that was out of necessity because of some lack of experience at the tight end room. But you and Jamari now are going to compete for tight end too, and probably an indicator of AJ, like he's just probably not there yet to be counted on next season. And you can't operate with just 2 tight ends. You need 3. And we'll see what Vanderploeg, what kind of, role he has. It's too early to decide that. But I think there was always probably the belief that it's more likely that he redshirts and is a 4-game guy than someone that plays 12, 13 games this season and the next season has a regular rotation. So Jamari Johnson's is a big need, and it fills a big hole. I agree. Unless some like massive number 1 ranked tight end in the portal decides to want to, hey, like I know you guys got a guy, but I want to come too. Like that's when you take it. But now it's pure luxury. It's not a necessity. And I probably would argue like finding another tackle is probably more important than finding another tight end to this room. So I'm in agreement there. It's going to be interesting to see how they fit, but I'm also in agreement that with how much they play 12 personnel, Jamari is going to be in a position to play a ton, and it wouldn't be the biggest shock in the world like if he doubles or triples his production as a sophomore at Oregon next season that he did as a redshirt freshman.
And then let's do this, Matt. We hadn't talked about this in our show notes. You just want to like reset the stage on offense. Like they've now landed 3 offensive players to the portal. Like what more needs are there, and are there names we should be attaching? Because I think we both agree probably receiver you need to address a little bit, and then maybe running back, but some of that will depend upon Jordan James, Noah Whittington, and what ends up happening.
Yeah, I think offensively it depends on what does Jordan James do at running back. Does he come back? If he does, you don't really need one. If Evan Stewart goes pro, and he has said that if he doesn't get a good grade and the NFL comes out and tells him go back to school, he's coming back, which I think that's a very mature thing to just publicly acknowledge. Like, because how many times have we seen guys come out and say, like, I know the draft is saying go back, but I'm going to prove them wrong. Like that happens all the time at Oregon and other places. But he's at least publicly come out and said now, like, if I get a bad grade or am told to come back, I'm going to come back. That's the decision. I think that depends there a little bit. Receiver, though, could be interesting. Maybe that segues to Dallas down the road here with him trying to get out. But I still think they should, if they go get a portal guy, I feel like it needs to be like the 6'2", 6'3", physical possession type, Trayshawn Holden, body type.
Chase Cota.
Yes. Someone that can go across the middle, someone that can block really well. That's something that Dan Lanning really praised Evan Stewart on. Like, they challenged him early in the year. You have to get better at blocking if you want to play. And he did, in Lanning's words. So someone that can help there. And then it probably also depends on Gary. Like, what decision does he do? Does he come back? And if he does come back, can he get back to where he was in 2023? Because he was pretty productive. Started 12 games and had moments where you were like, okay, yeah, this guy's a dude. So it's weird. Like, you kind of need to fill these holes, but at the same time, you kind of don't. And it's going to take a really special player for them to add a player to those two position groups, I think.
Yeah, I do think if Stewart and James and Whittington, let's just say, all go, you're talking about removing a lot of your key skill players, because Tez and Trayshawn are also gone. So it's your 3 top receivers and your 2 top running backs. And not that they've recruited those positions poorly, because it's the opposite. They've got so much good young talent. It's just none of it's really proven at either of those spots. At least, well, none of it I don't think really has been proven at any school, aside from Gary if he were to come back. But because I was just thinking, like, what would be, if Evan leaves, what would be your receiving core? And your group would probably be like, I think DeCorian, as crazy as it is to stay a true freshman is starting, I'd have him there. And I say it's crazy because I was just doing this earlier. Under Dan, 2 true freshmen have started, and it was Pancho and Mateo, and those both came in the Fiesta Bowl last year after opt-outs kind of like decimated those spots and kind of provided the path to that. So I think DeCorian's a special talent. He was ranked there for a reason, and my expectation is he's one of your starters. And then you've got guys like Justice Lowe and Gary Bryant, who have histories of playing and being pretty productive, but not like alpha players at all, right? And so I had looked at Dallas Wilson as somebody who was capable, and this is, again, a transition into that, as coming in, and again, true freshman, you don't want to put too high of expectations. The track record hasn't been that way at Oregon, but who was, as a 5-star and a big-time prospect, someone capable of coming in and maybe not being a starter, but being someone who could contribute. So I think they're kind of an interesting spot at receiver. I agree, Matt, because there's really no veteran presence there besides Gary. And even, I'm really high on like a Jeremiah McClellan. And I mean, I think Cooper Perry has a chance to be really good, but like, I just don't know, or Kyler Casper, Jurion Dickey, I don't really know what to do with that based upon his track record here, which I guess is similar to all these other guys in terms of he's just been here and hasn't done much. But it's, you talk it through and you go like, you really would have a very, very meager number of guys who've played major college football snaps at that position, which is why I think like if the right kind of guys show up in the portal, you'd really want to take a look at that.
Yeah, it's going to be hard. And I guess real quick on the defensive side of the football, defensive line still needs to be an area to address in finding like a nose tackle to replace Jamari Caldwell if he doesn't come back with this new ruling. Inside linebacker feels like one where you probably want to add somebody.
I agree.
Because you lose Bassa, you lose Betcher, you lose Justin Jacobs, you lose Connor Soley, and those are 4 of your top 6 linebackers that you've played. Devin Jackson, Jerry Mixon being the other 2. And obviously Devin Jackson's like your 3rd guy. And
he's a starter next year. He's clearly a guy next year. Yeah.
And we feel good about him starting next season. But what happens with Jerry Mixon? Like, do we feel good about it? A guy that's played 17 games over 2 seasons so far, but like hasn't been ultra productive, hasn't been a guy where like, wow, like this guy, just wait until he gets full-time starter reps. Like, we haven't felt that way about him. Is he ready for the step up? We don't know. He could be. He was a highly rated guy, but we don't know.
I'm skeptical of him, but we'll see. Maybe I'll be proven wrong. That happens all the time.
Right. And then you have a bunch of freshmen, Dylan Williams, Kamar Mathudi, and Braden Platt, that have all had minimal reps, if any, this season. And that just feels like you got to have some experience. Corner and safety, like, it's going to take a special talent to go out and add these players into the mix. Defensively, it feels more clean and cut. Like, you need a defensive lineman, you need a linebacker, and maybe you add a second guy at each position if it's warranted.
Yeah. I mean, I think they're at 5 today, and it does feel like more than 12 would be a surprise to me.
Correct. Yeah.
But that is also, and this is the other part we haven't gotten into, what happens with departures for Oregon after the college football playoff when they're running.
Correct.
Are there guys who enter who we think are going to be on this team who we're including that aren't here next year? So that's the other part that you have to kind of decipher.
And it's been weird. I don't know for you, Eric. Like, did you know there was a bowl game last night? Like, I had no idea.
I did
until I sat down and turned on the TV and was like, "Oh, Cal and UNLV are playing." I had completely forgotten about that. But I don't know if you've noticed, but today a bunch of UNLV guys are hitting the portal, and a couple Cal guys have as well. And as more of these bowl games start playing out, because there's an opportunity for other guys to use the bowl games as a showcase. Like, hey, this is what I can do. I'm getting more reps, or this is my last chance. Here's what I got. Like, as more bowl games finish, more players enter the portal. And what happens with Oregon when their season's over? We should also note, like, every team that plays a bowl game or a playoff game after the December 29th date, which is when the portal closes, if you're playing in a postseason game after that period, you get 5 days upon the completion of your bowl game to throw your name into the portal. That could impact Oregon. It probably will impact Oregon. But what other names hit the market and show interest in Oregon, or Oregon shows interest in them? So the next couple of weeks are going to be really interesting as these bowl games finish up. Playoff games get played. Players enter the portal. Oregon sees players decide to leave, because that will happen. They've only had 6 guys leave. None of them are projected starters next season. I think you can look at all of them and say, like, yeah, it sucks that they didn't finish their career here, but in the reality of the cold world that we live in, they're replaceable. And so nothing has impacted Oregon yet. We'll see if it continues to be that way down the road. All right, let's transition to this Dallas and Wilson stuff. I was texting with our Florida site last night about it. Excuse me. We both were kind of in an agreement of, I was talking with Blake, and we were both kind of in the agreement of, like, this recruitment has been so wild all the way up into it. Like, let's just see where things kind of shake out after a couple days. There's certainly smoke out there that he's trying to get out of his financial aid agreement and go back to play, for Florida. And then this morning he was able to actually, Blake was, to speak with Wilson's NIL representation, and they did confirm he has requested as of Tuesday that he get released from his information or from his papers, and Oregon has until Thursday end of day to do it or not, and they're going to do it. Like, the PR ramifications that come with this are astronomically bad, unless maybe they've used the 48 hours to convince his opinion again and have him stick with Oregon. And we have seen, and this is why, like, I earlier was like, maybe he doesn't leave, maybe he does. I think he does. I expect him to not be on Oregon's roster in the spring and then in the fall. But this kind of, is he coming or is he not going storyline with Dallas Wilson has happened 7 or 8 times before. And every time it's been washed. But this time it does feel like it's probably official. He's probably not going to be at Oregon next season. And it stings. Losing a 5-star stings no matter what. But if there was ever a position to lose one, this feels like the one to do it, because you recruited the position really well from a young guy perspective. But nonetheless, just like I mentioned with Trayshawn Holden, like, he's a body type that they didn't have on the roster next season because he's like 6'5".
Yeah, I think more like 6'3", Matt. But I mean, I'm with you on that. While I agree that they recruited the position really well, and the hard part here is we don't really have early returns on any of these young guys, because unless they're playing on Saturdays, which really none of them have been able to do, we're not getting much of a sense of their development. Dan is very tight-lipped when he talks about that stuff, and he gives you kind of, not to be critical of how he handles his business, but he doesn't really go into younger players and what the development is looking like in season. And we don't get the position coaches at all after fall camp. So I couldn't really tell you, and again, based upon what we see in practice, I couldn't really tell you, aside from what like third-party sources are saying, who looks like they're ready to become a guy. And it's very possible multiple of these younger guys are developing there, but if they don't, losing on Dallas Wilson might be something that actually impacts you as much or as soon as 2025, because we've already run through all the guys who are going. Evan Stewart may join them. And I think to me, losing him puts a little more onus on finding some portal solutions. Again, not that I thought that the receiving core hinged on true freshmen, because I've already said the spiel on Dan doesn't really play these guys, but this is a 5-star guy who has a lot of talent and who, talking to people in the industry, people thought was maybe ready to contribute, whether it be at Oregon or Florida, right away. And so, it's going to be interesting. You mentioned kind of the ups and downs of this recruitment, and then what Oregon does in terms of releasing him to the, his papers. Doesn't it feel like that's one where you also want to play the long game here, and he might just enter the portal in a couple of years and end up at Oregon? That's when you said that, like, they're going to let him out because of the optics. Well, it's also just like maintain the relationship, because shoot, this has been so up and down. Like, I wouldn't be surprised at all if we get through 25 and he's in the portal and Oregon is the logical landing place. So I'm not reporting that, obviously, but this has been so back and forth between these two schools for months now that maybe that's what this ends up being. So it's a real bummer to lose a 5-star kid. And again, a kid that has a chance to be a really special player. I think Oregon will be fine at receiver, but I do think that I think they need to go find at least one receiver now.
If he gets out, you lose Evan Stewart, like this automatically turns into you need to go out and get a guy in the portal. And that's not going to be a problem. I think that's where I land, where I think of it as, you mentioned it, freshmen just don't play at Oregon. And we've thought in previous years, like, hey, the DAC is stacked for this guy to see a prominent role, or even a second year situation, like, hey, you're going to play, and it just doesn't happen. And so I think knowing that, and knowing Oregon's track record of getting Tez, getting Trayshawn, getting Gary last year, all newcomers, all had big impacts, getting Coda the year before that, going out and getting Evan Stewart this season, like, history has shown they can go out and find a dude at receiver. And I have no doubt that they'll find a guy that's a 1-year stopgap, and they'll just reload in 2026, because look at how well Oregon's recruited the last couple of years, and just the cycle is delayed by 1 year. And I think that's the beauty of the portal, where 5-6 years ago I'd look at this and probably have a totally different take of, like, this really hurts Oregon. Like, they're in a really difficult position here. But the reality is, like, now, if a high school guy doesn't show up, like, you can go find a portal guy for 1 year, and there's going to be a bunch of them that are going to be able to replicate similar production that he would have had. And that it comes across as, like, I don't think he's a good player, because he is.
He's great.
He's unbelievably good. But the portal just changes everything, where you can go and drop water in a bucket and find a receiver. Like, it's easy to find talent in the portal. And I guess that's where I'm at, where it stings short term, stings long term, but there's an easy solution to replacing him next season. And it just becomes, can you find another talented player in 2026, which I feel pretty confident they can do.
And Gatlin Bear comes off the Mormon mission in 2026. And again,
I didn't thought of that.
That's a guy whose name, it's been off a lot of people's radar because he's on his mission, but that's a 5-star kid who will, at least based upon his plans when he signed, will be with the team in 2026, and is certainly somebody who could be a contributor based on physical tools. It's hard to project what he's been doing during his mission, but I will note that his older brother, I believe, won the decathlon national championship at Mississippi State his first year coming off his own mission. So these guys seem to come in ready.
Jeez, that's ridiculous. I had totally forgotten about Gatlin Bear, and he is like what, 6'2", 6'3", like
6'2", yeah.
And super fast. So we'll see what kind of impact he could have. So yeah, like it sucks. It's not a good situation to be in, but in today's college athletics, it's one that schools can have a clear indicator, a clear path of finding a solution and finding a replacement, where 5 years ago, 6 years ago, it wasn't the case. You lose a 5-star after signing day and he wants out, like there's no backup option. And all of a sudden you have to go through a whole year waiting to backfill the hole. And for all we know, Oregon could have the hole filled later today.
Yeah, well, and then just one last thing that probably you're not going to find an equivalent player in the prep ranks, but I also wonder, we do have this thing called February called the signing period again, and
yeah, that's true.
Maybe there's a high school kid that had a big year. This was what basically happened with Justice Lowe a couple of years ago. I think he signed early, but he had this awesome senior season. He wasn't really on anyone's radar, and then suddenly Oregon was flipping him from Utah at the last minute to sign him. Maybe there's a guy out there, and I don't have names from a receiver perspective in 25 remaining. Right, yeah, what do you? Let me know what you see, because that could be, again, I don't think that's a 2025 solution, because there's probably not anybody in that cycle that's going to help you right away, but maybe you find somebody who can be a contributor down the line through the prep ranks, if that's an avenue they choose to go to. I don't know that. That's another, as you said, Matt, there's now way more options to go fill, troubleshoot these kind of situations if they do happen.
Well, the options aren't very
not
many.
Good.
There's not a lot of options here. The 27th best receiver in the country, Ferzel Shepard, is committed to Mississippi State but did not sign. He is a 4-star. He's a 6'2" receiver out of Louisiana. Any interest in Oregon? No. Previously, Donovan Murph from South Carolina is the top available uncommitted receiver in the class. He's a 4-star, the 42nd best receiver in the country. And then you just have to keep going. I'm looking down the list here, and there really isn't anybody else until you get to a 3-star guy that's the 94th best player at the position. So, like you said, like you're gonna have to truly find a deep diamond in the rough. A guy that Oregon did offer but doesn't fit the physical profile is Caden Butler from California. He's kind of fallen though. He peaked really high in his junior year, and then every cycle has kind of fallen. But I guess we should also note, like, Oregon also signed Cooper Perry.
Yeah.
A very talented 4-star receiver out of Arizona. And that's why I mentioned earlier, like, if they're going to lose a guy at a position, it's probably this one, because 2 straight years they've signed, if you don't include Dallas Wilson, 7 guys at the Count Gatlin Bear at the position, and probably 4 of them over the last 20, 15 years of high school recruiting, this is the best guy in the class at receiver. And the talent level has elevated itself at the position across the board, really, but at receiver too. And so it's now just a numbers game. Can you make sure over the last 6 or 7 guys that you've signed in the last 2 years, 2 or 3 of them hit? And if they do, you're going to be fine. If they don't, the Dallas Wilson one will hurt even more.
Yeah, and there's always the portal as the safety net too.
Correct. All right, that's going to do it for us here on the Autzen Audibles podcast. We'll be back later down the road with more shows previewing college football playoffs. Next time we are on, we'll probably know Oregon's opponent and who they will be playing in the Rose Bowl. I guess I've been told it's the college football quarterfinals played at the Rose Bowl. It's not actually the Rose Bowl, which is disappointing. But nonetheless, playoffs are here. We'll break it down, who Oregon plays, coming up here next on the Autzen Audibles podcast.
Talk to you later, folks.